Frank Castle has spent the last 5 years working as the Punisher and launches an attack on a party hosted by mob boss Gaetano Cesare. During the event, Cesare's Lieutenant Billy informs him that Cristu plans to bring a biological weapon into New York and is offering $10 million for safe passage. Billy adds that the weapon will leave the city, so Cesare personally faces no threat. Cesare, however, rejects the deal, which enrages Billy. He considers himself the mob's top earner. When Cesare compares Billy to his unhinged brother, Loony Bin Jim, Billy flies into a rage. Castle kills everyone except Billy, who escapes and retreats to his hideout at a recycling plant. Meanwhile, detectives Martin Soap and Saffiotti, who were surveilling the party, see Castle departing the mansion. Saffiotti intercepts him, shares Billy's whereabouts, and even hands over his car keys so Castle can flee quickly. To cover this up, Saffiotti punches himself in the nose until it bleeds. Later, he tells Soap that Castle disarmed him and broke his nose to make his escape. Meanwhile, 3 members of the urban free-flow gang arrive at Billy's hideout. They regularly serve as drug couriers for Billy because of their special skills. Unbeknownst to them, Frank has already slipped into the hideout and taken out several guards stationed outside. He goes on to kill Billy's remaining henchmen and accidentally shoots Nicky, who turns out to be an undercover FBI agent. Frank and Billy exchange gunfire before Billy takes a misstep into a glass crushing machine, which leaves him horribly disfigured, though he survives. After eliminating all of Billy's men, Frank makes a quick escape. The following day at Nicky's funeral, his partner, FBI agent Paul Budiansky, glares angrily at Agent Miller, who was responsible for sending Nicky on the high-risk mission involving Billy Rosati and his gang. Miller defends himself by saying he could not have predicted Frank Castle's appearance, nor the slaughter of Cesare's crew, including Billy's men. Paul visits Angela, Nicky's wife, vowing to bring Frank Castle, the one responsible for Nicky's death, to justice. From a distance, Frank attends Nicky's funeral, then stops by his own family's graves. Memories of their massacre haunt him, fueling his vigilante actions. Later, Paul confronts the local police for failing to capture Frank, who has been acting as a vigilante for 4 years. A tense argument follows until Saffiotti advises Paul to speak with Officer Martin Soap, who has been investigating Frank. Soap explains that Frank once served in special forces, but after the mafia murdered his wife and daughter, he began fighting crime on his own terms, convinced that some criminals never receive the punishment they deserve. Elsewhere, Frank confesses to his associate Microchip, who supplies him with weapons and intelligence, that he accidentally killed an innocent FBI agent. Racked with guilt, especially knowing the agent had a wife and daughter, Frank tells Microchip to leave him alone. Meanwhile, Billy discovers from his men that Nicky Donatelli was actually an undercover FBI agent and had secretly been hoarding the profits from their drug sales. Pittsy, one of Billy's men, says he knows Nicky's address and believes the money is hidden at Nicky's house. A doctor then comes in to remove the bandages from Billy's face, but finds he can't operate. Billy's injuries are too severe. Ink, another subordinate, is so unsettled by Billy's appearance that he vomits. Pittsy takes Ink aside and scolds him for his reaction. When they return, they discover that Billy has killed the doctor for failing to fix his face. As they leave, Billy lays out his plan to recover his money and kill Frank Castle. Meanwhile, the story moves to a mental hospital where Billy's younger brother Jim, a violent psychopathic killer, is heavily restrained and mistreated by a male nurse. Billy and his men storm in, freeing Jim, who's both surprised and pleased by Billy's terrifying new look. Once released, Jim tortures and murders the nurse who abused him. Later, at a hotel, Billy is horrified when he sees his reflection, but Jim reassures him, promising to help him take revenge on Frank. To ease Billy's distress, Jim destroys all the mirrors in the room. That evening, Frank goes to Nicky's home to see Angela, hoping to apologize for killing Nicky and offering her money as compensation. Instead, Angela draws a gun on him and orders him to leave. Elsewhere, Billy and his crew meet with drug lord Cristu. One of Cristu's men mocks Billy's disfigured face, prompting Billy to kill him on the spot. Tensions flare, but Cristu manages to calm everyone down, and they agree to finalize a deal at the docks soon. The following day, Frank tells Microchip at his home that he plans to give up being the Punisher and leave town. However, Microchip reveals that Billy Rosati is still alive and seeking revenge. Hearing this, Frank decides not to retire and instead vows to kill Billy and his men. He collaborates with Microchip and a contact named Carlos, who warns him about Billy's henchmen, Maginty and his gang, preparing for a robbery. Meanwhile, Paul teams up with Martin in a bid to capture Frank. That night, having discovered where Maginty and his crew were hiding, Frank launches an attack and kills them all. Before finishing off Maginty, he forces him to disclose Billy's whereabouts. Meanwhile, Paul and Martin show up, spot Frank, and give chase. Frank and Paul engage in a violent struggle, with Frank ultimately overpowering Paul, only to realize it was part of Paul's plan to arrest him. Frank pleads to be released, explaining that Billy and his men are en route to Angela's house for the drug money Nicky stashed there. But Paul ignores him and puts him in handcuffs. At the same time, Billy and his crew break into Nicky's house, taking Angela and her daughter hostage. Billy demands to know where the drug money is, but Angela insists she has no idea. While Billy interrogates her, his brother Jim smashes things around the house. 2 police officers on patrol hear the commotion, but when they arrive, Jim brutally kills them. Fearing for her daughter's life, Angela finally admits that her late husband had a safe in their room and provides the code. Paul pulls up in front of Nicky's house and tells Martin to watch Frank, who's cuffed in the back seat, while he goes inside. Once Paul is gone, Frank urges Martin to set him free, revealing that Martin is actually working for him. Inside, Ink and Pittsy are ready for Paul, warning him not to try anything if he values Angela and her daughter's lives. Meanwhile, Billy is furious to discover the safe is empty. His anger causes a commotion, and Jim joins in. Pittsy orders Ink to check upstairs, but Frank appears and attacks him. Seizing the moment, Paul reclaims his gun and aims at Pittsy, though Frank kills Pittsy first. Frank then rushes Angela and her daughter to safety. Paul tries to stop him, but Billy and Jim come downstairs and open fire, forcing Paul to take cover and letting Frank escape. Ultimately, Paul and Martin manage to catch Billy and Jim, who are taken to the police station and then to the FBI. Agent Miller offers to release them if they help capture Cristu and his gang. Billy and Jim agree without hesitation. At the docks, FBI agents lie in wait for Cristu, and Billy and Jim's cooperation leads to his capture. True to his word, Miller frees them, and also gives them information about Microchip, Frank Castle's close ally. Meanwhile, Carlos informs Frank that Microchip can't meet him because his mother is ill. Frank instructs Carlos to watch over Angela and her daughter while he heads to Microchip's house. Upon arrival, Frank discovers Microchip's mother has died under grim circumstances, and Microchip himself is nowhere to be found. Sensing trouble, Frank rushes back to his safe house, where he finds Carlos fatally wounded and learns that Jim has kidnapped Angela and her daughter. Carlos pleads with Frank to end his suffering, and Frank reluctantly complies. It becomes clear that Billy and Jim plan to use Microchip, along with Angela and her daughter, as bait to draw Frank into a trap. Later, Frank meets with Paul, who reveals that Billy and Jim have been set free. Paul then urges Frank to deal with them his way, acknowledging they operate beyond the reach of the law. Frank agrees, but only on the condition that Paul surrender his badge and federal status if he intends to help. Billy and Jim head to a bar to assemble a crew for their revenge plot against Frank. While Frank keeps an eye on their heavily guarded hideout, Paul visits Cristu's father, Tiberiu, proposing a partnership to get even with Billy, the man responsible for putting Cristu behind bars. Tiberiu, eager to avenge his son, quickly agrees. That night, he and his hand-picked men arrive at Billy's place under the guise of mercenaries ready to fight the Punisher. Inside the building, Angela, her daughter, and Microchip are held captive. Tiberiu instructs his men to open fire on Billy's crew, triggering a massive shootout. While the gunfire erupts below, Frank slips in from above and eliminates several of Billy's henchmen. He then clashes with Jim, but ultimately gains the upper hand, drawing on his elite special forces training. Jim flees to the hostage room, where Billy holds Microchip at gunpoint and Jim threatens Angela and her daughter. Forced to choose whom to save, Frank opts for Angela and her daughter, leaving Microchip to be killed by Billy. Enraged, Frank then finishes off Jim and viciously beats Billy before killing him as well. With Billy's men defeated and Angela's family freed, Paul urges Frank to escape before the police arrive. Angela hugs Frank, letting him know she forgives him. Outside, Martin tries to persuade Frank to retire from his vigilante life, only to quickly change his mind when a mugger appears, and Frank dispatches him on the spot. If you enjoyed this video, don't be shy to hit the like button, and if you disliked it, hit the dislike button twice, just to be sure. It would be best if you watched the whole movie. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe for more videos like this.